Marcus Licinius Crassus was one of the most powerful figures in the late Roman Republic. Born in 115 BCE to a wealthy and influential family, he inherited political connections and social status that allowed him to rise swiftly in Rome's political hierarchy. His ambition, however, extended far beyond the privileges of his lineage. Crassus became known for his relentless pursuit of wealth. Unlike many of his peers who sought glory through conquest or governance, Crassus viewed wealth as the ultimate form of power. He believed that riches could purchase influence, protection, and authority in the unstable political landscape of Rome. During the sullen civil wars, Crassus found his first great opportunity. When Lucius Cornelius Sulla seized control of Rome, he implemented proscriptions, lists of enemies of the state whose properties were confiscated and sold. Crassus exploited these sales, buying estates of the condemned at minimal prices and reselling them for large profits. This marked the beginning of his immense fortune. He also expanded his wealth through real estate speculation. After the civil conflicts had destroyed much of Rome, Crassus invested heavily in reconstruction. He purchased burned properties at low costs, rebuilt them using slave labor, and sold them for enormous gains. His business ventures extended into mining, silver production, and slave trading. Crassus owned what was possibly the largest private fire brigade in Rome. When fires broke out in the city, he and his men would arrive quickly at the scene. Rather than assisting immediately, Crassus would offer to buy the endangered property at a low price. Only once ownership was transferred to him would his brigade begin to extinguish the flames. This ruthless practice made him both feared and despised. By the middle of the 1st century BCE, Crassus was considered the wealthiest man in Rome. His fortune was estimated at over 200 million sesterces, an amount unmatched by any of his contemporaries. Yet, despite his immense wealth, Crassus yearned for military and political glory to match that of Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great. In 73 BCE, when the slave rebellion led by Spartacus erupted in southern Italy, Crassus saw an opportunity. He financed and led several Roman legions to suppress the revolt. His campaign was brutal and efficient. After capturing thousands of slaves, he ordered the crucifixion of 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, as a warning to others. This act of calculated cruelty solidified his reputation for both discipline and ruthlessness. Although Crassus succeeded in ending the rebellion, much of the public glory went to Pompey, who returned from Spain and claimed to have finished the war. Crassus resented this deeply. He had achieved victory, but recognition remained divided. To strengthen his position, he later formed an informal political alliance with Pompey and Julius Caesar, known as the First Triumvirate. The Triumvirate allowed Crassus to expand his influence further. Pompey controlled the army, Caesar held immense popularity among the people, and Crassus provided the financial resources. Together, they dominated Roman politics, controlling legislation and appointments to suit their mutual interests. Despite his role in this alliance, Crassus continued to feel overshadowed by his partners. Caesar's military successes in Gaul and Pompey's command in the East elevated their fame to near legendary levels. Crassus's wealth alone could not grant him equal standing. He began to seek a military campaign that would bring him comparable prestige. His ambitions turned eastward toward Parthia, a powerful empire in what is now Iran. The Parthian Empire had long resisted Roman influence, and Crassus believed a successful invasion would secure his legacy as a conqueror. Against the advice of the Senate and even his allies, he prepared an invasion of Parthia in 53 BCE. Crassus's decision was driven by both greed and pride. The Parthian territories were rich in gold, silver, and trade routes connecting Rome with the East. A victory would grant him control over immense wealth and solidify his place in history. Many senators viewed the campaign as reckless, but Crassus pressed forward, confident that fortune and Roman discipline would ensure success. In preparation, he gathered 7 legions totaling nearly 40,000 men, along with cavalry and auxiliary troops. His army marched through Syria, where he collected additional supplies and local support. Crassus ignored traditional diplomatic protocols, refusing to coordinate with neighboring kingdoms that offered assistance. His impatience to invade reflected his growing obsession with personal gain. By early spring, Crassus crossed the Euphrates River, entering Parthian territory. His initial movements were cautious but filled with arrogance. He believed that the Parthian forces were inferior to Rome's well-trained legions. Reports of Parthian cavalry and archers were dismissed as exaggerated. Crassus was confident that superior Roman tactics and discipline would overcome any resistance. His leadership, however, lacked the strategic skill required for a campaign in the open deserts of Mesopotamia. Crassus's forces suffered from poor coordination and inadequate supplies. The harsh climate, long distances, and unfamiliar terrain weakened his army's morale. Yet he continued to push forward, determined to reach the heart of Parthian lands. As he advanced, local guides and allies attempted to warn him of the dangers ahead. They spoke of the Parthian cavalry's speed and the effectiveness of their mounted archers. Crassus ignored these warnings, interpreting them as cowardice. His pride blinded him to the reality of the threat he faced. Meanwhile, the Parthian king, Orodes II, prepared his defense carefully. He did not rush to meet the Romans in open battle. Instead, he allowed his general, Surena, to draw Crassus deeper into the desert, where Roman formations would be less effective. Surena commanded a smaller but highly mobile force, composed mainly of skilled cavalry and heavily armored cataphracts. By the time Crassus realized he had been lured into a trap, it was too late. The vast open plain near Carrhae offered no cover or water. The Parthians appeared on the horizon, their horse archers moving in perfect coordination. The battle that followed would become one of Rome's most disastrous defeats. Crassus's fate was sealed not by strength of arms, but by his overconfidence and insatiable greed. The campaign that was meant to immortalize his name instead became the final act of his life. In the coming events, his wealth and ambition would be turned against him in a manner that symbolized the very vice for which he was most remembered. The story of his end became a lasting example in Roman history of how unchecked ambition could lead to ruin. His enemies would not only defeat him, but also deliver a punishment that reflected the greed he had embodied throughout his career. The legend of molten gold would emerge from these final moments, representing the ultimate irony of his downfall. Quick reminder, if you are enjoying, do like the video and subscribe the channel for upcoming historical torture content. The Battle of Carrhae in 53 BCE became one of the most devastating defeats in Roman military history. Marcus Licinius Crassus, once the richest man in Rome, led his legions into the arid plains of Mesopotamia without proper intelligence, supply lines, or terrain knowledge. His reliance on wealth and arrogance overshadowed sound military judgment. The Roman army numbered around 40,000 men, including infantry legions and cavalry units. The Parthian general Surena commanded roughly 10,000 troops, but his force was specialized. Parthian soldiers were masters of mounted archery and heavy cavalry tactics. They relied on speed, mobility, and distance rather than close combat, exploiting the Romans' dependence on tight infantry formations. As Crassus marched through the desert, his troops grew exhausted. The sun beat down relentlessly and the sands reflected the heat back into their armor. Water was scarce, and supplies were dwindling. Despite the warnings of his officers, Crassus pushed onward, confident that a decisive engagement would end the campaign swiftly. The Parthians appeared suddenly near Carrhae. Their banners of silk shimmered in the sunlight, and their ranks moved silently across the plain. They made no effort to engage immediately. Instead, they surrounded the Roman formation at a distance and began releasing waves of arrows. The Parthian composite bow was powerful and precise, capable of piercing Roman armor even from long range. The Roman soldiers tried to advance, but the Parthians remained out of reach. Whenever the legions moved forward, the horse archers retreated, maintaining a deadly distance. The sound of arrows filled the air and the cries of the wounded spread through the ranks. The Romans had no effective counterattack. Their shields formed walls, but they could not advance without exposing themselves. As the battle dragged on, Surena employed his famous tactic, the feigned retreat. His horsemen turned and appeared to flee. Believing the enemy was finally breaking, Crassus ordered a charge. The Roman cavalry under his son, Publius Licinius Crassus, pursued them. It was a fatal mistake. The Parthians led Publius deep into the desert, separating him from the main army. When the Romans were surrounded, Surena's forces turned back and attacked. Publius fought bravely, but his men were overwhelmed by the rain of arrows. Surrounded and unable to retreat, he ordered his standard-bearer to kill him rather than be captured. The Parthians decapitated him, mounted his head on a spear, and paraded it before the Roman lines. The sight of his son's head broke Crassus's spirit. His troops' morale collapsed. The Parthians continued their assault with precision, keeping their distance and firing endlessly. The Roman soldiers, trapped and demoralized, began to fall in waves. By the end of the day, thousands lay dead under the scorching sun. Crassus tried to retreat to Carrhae under the cover of night. His remaining forces scattered, seeking safety in nearby towns or deserts. The Parthians pursued relentlessly. Many Romans were captured, others died of thirst and exhaustion. Crassus, desperate and disoriented, attempted to negotiate with Surena for safe passage. Surena agreed to meet, but demanded that Crassus come personally to finalize the terms. Despite his officers' objections, Crassus complied. At the meeting, tensions rose quickly. A scuffle broke out when one of Crassus's men insulted the Parthian envoys. Surena's guards seized Crassus and his generals. In the confusion, Crassus was struck down and captured alive. According to Roman and later Greek sources, Crassus's death became symbolic of his greed. While historical accounts vary, one version of the event gained legendary status. It was said that the Parthians mocked Crassus's obsession with wealth by executing him with molten gold. The story describes that after his capture, Surena ordered a large golden cauldron to be heated until the metal turned liquid. Crassus was restrained, and molten gold was poured into his mouth as a punishment for his insatiable greed. The act was meant to symbolize that his thirst for wealth had consumed him both in life and in death. Other accounts suggest that the gold was not literally molten metal, but rather a theatrical gesture performed after his execution. Some reports indicate that his head was filled with molten gold after death and presented to the Parthian king, Orodes II, as a symbolic offering. In either version, the meaning remained the same. Wealth had become his curse. The Parthians reportedly displayed Crassus's head during a royal celebration in the capital city of Seleucia. The event coincided with a performance of the Greek tragedy The Bacchae by Euripides. In a grim display of irony, Crassus's severed head was used as a stage prop during the play, replacing the mask of Pentheus, a ruler punished for arrogance. The audience interpreted this as divine retribution. The molten gold story became part of Roman moral tradition. It served as a warning to future leaders and citizens about the dangers of greed and ambition. While historians debate whether molten gold was truly used, the legend persisted through centuries, reflecting how Romans viewed Crassus's downfall. In the years that followed, the defeat at Carrhae haunted the Roman Republic. It marked a major loss of both troops and honor. The Parthians had demonstrated that Rome was not invincible. Crassus's death also disrupted the balance of power within the triumvirate. Without him, the fragile alliance between Caesar and Pompey began to crumble. The symbolism of the molten gold execution was powerful in Roman culture. Gold represented not only wealth, but also the corruption of virtue. Crassus had turned the pursuit of riches into a measure of success, but in the end, it became the instrument of his ruin. His death illustrated how ambition without restraint could destroy even the most powerful men. The story spread rapidly throughout Rome. It was repeated by philosophers, historians, and moralists as an example of how fortune could change with arrogance and excess. Writers such as Plutarch, Cassius Dio, and Florus recorded the tale, each emphasizing its moral lesson more than its factual certainty. The image of Crassus's golden death became a symbol of Rome's internal decay. It reflected a society increasingly driven by greed, luxury, and competition among elites. The legend endured not because of its accuracy, but because it expressed a deeper truth about human nature. For centuries, the molten gold of Crassus remained a metaphor for the consequences of unrestrained ambition. His story was told not as a tale of heroism, but as a cautionary example of how wealth, when pursued without virtue, leads inevitably to destruction. His end, whether literal or symbolic, marked the moment when one of Rome's richest men paid the ultimate price for his greed. The death of Marcus Licinius Crassus at Carrhae left a deep scar on the Roman Republic. His defeat not only destroyed one of its wealthiest citizens, but also shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility. For centuries afterward, the story of his execution by molten gold became one of the most enduring legends of antiquity, repeated as both a moral lesson and a political warning. Historians have long debated the accuracy of the molten gold account. Ancient writers such as Plutarch and Cassius Dio described it as a symbolic punishment rather than a verified fact. Some suggest that Parthian sources exaggerated the story to mock Roman greed. Others believe that later, Roman authors shaped the tale to reinforce moral teachings about the dangers of avarice. Despite uncertainty about its literal truth, the story served an important role in Roman moral philosophy. It illustrated how excessive ambition and greed could bring ruin even to the most successful men. Crassus's wealth had been unmatched, but his inability to find satisfaction turned him into a cautionary symbol for generations. The image of molten gold filling his mouth represented an insatiable hunger that could never be satisfied, even in death. In political terms, Crassus's demise also had lasting consequences. His death left Julius Caesar and Pompey without a third balancing force in the first triumvirate. The fragile alliance between them quickly deteriorated, leading to civil war. Caesar's victory in that conflict would eventually end the Republic and give rise to the Roman Empire. In this way, Crassus's fall indirectly paved the way for a new political order. For the Parthians, the defeat of Crassus became a symbol of national pride. It demonstrated their ability to resist Rome's power and defend their independence. The victory at Carrhae was celebrated for generations and remained a point of prestige in Parthian history. Surena, the general who led the Parthian army, became a national hero despite later falling victim to internal politics. Archaeological findings near the ancient site of Carrhae have provided limited material evidence of the battle, but Roman records confirm the scale of the loss. Over 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed, and another 10,000 were taken prisoner. Many of these captives were reportedly relocated to the eastern frontier, where they lived out their lives far from Rome. The molten gold legend continued to appear in art, literature, and philosophy. Medieval and Renaissance scholars cited it as an example of divine justice. Enlightenment thinkers referred to it in discussions about moral corruption and the ethical limits of wealth. Even in modern times, it remains a powerful metaphor for self-destruction through greed. Ultimately, the story of Marcus Licinius Crassus stands as a reminder of the fragility of human ambition. Wealth can grant power, but it cannot ensure wisdom or restraint. The legend of the Cauldron of Gold survives not because of its spectacle, but because it reflects an enduring truth about excess, the idea that when desire becomes limitless, it consumes the very person who pursues it.